This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Nam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, the genocide in Gaza continues full steam ahead despite the delusion of the ceasefire negotiations going on between Antony Blinken and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We have passed a really grim milestone in Gaza with 40,000 Palestinians being murdered that we're aware of. Some estimates, according to the Lancet, suggest that that number could be closer to 186,000. There are 20,000 missing children. Starvation remains endemic with over 500,000 Palestinians, mostly children, literally starving to death. And that the blockade and assault and genocide in Gaza continues full steam ahead, despite the celebratory mood that's occurring in Chicago with the delusional celebrations of unity, despite what's happening on the outside. We're going to be covering all of those stories today. And at the top of our list of stories today, Jamal, it has to do with the Democratic Convention, which kicked off last night with Joe Biden, with Hillary Clinton, with AOC. And the big question on our minds, as well as our listeners' minds, is, will the DNC convince uncommitted voters who were loud and vocal yesterday to vote for Kamala Harris? AOC, in fact, said that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly to bring a ceasefire into Gaza. Now, I have to refrain from throwing up after I quoted AOC because it's so profoundly incorrect, but we're going to discuss it anyways. We're going to discuss the American, or I should say the American-Israeli ceasefire proposal. Is it really going anywhere? Even though Benjamin Netanyahu publicly says that he's accepted it, who knows? We're going to get further updates on the grim situation in Gaza, and it's important that we don't lose sight of what's happening in the West Bank as well as Jerusalem with the settler colonial project that is rampaging throughout the West Bank and Jerusalem, Jamal. So we have a very busy show today.
You're right. We're going to start with the DNC. Jess, leaders of the pro-Palestinian uncommitted movement have been warning that Vice President Kamala Harris could lose the elections, could lose votes, and potentially key swing states if there is not an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and an arms embargo against Israel. Something basically they acknowledge that she does not support, despite what you've said, what AOC have said, maybe about the ceasefire, but definitely I've listened to some of those leaders talking about, for example, the an arms embargo and why Israel gets away skirting around the Leahy law. When Israel kills children, uses U.S.-made weapons to kill civilians, innocent children, and so on. So far, as far as we know, and we're getting onto day 2, so things might change by the time this broadcast
Jamal,
airs.
No, there's no
change.
Don't
think so?
I mean, I don't think there's a change.
Okay, let's talk about at least what's happening now. So the uncommitted leaders have secured a panel discussion. That's all, a panel discussion on Palestinian
not even
rights.
in front, but not even the full convention will hear that. It's a small little group off to the side.
But the Democrats, in control of the DNC, they basically refuse to allow, for example, a Palestinian American speaker to address the convention from the main stage. So when we talk about from the main stage at the United Center in Chicago, and so they've been asking for this. As far as we know now, these requests have so far gone unheeded. The Democratic, and this is what I'm reading here from the platform, so everybody should know, from the Democratic Party's platform, which says that the administration is determined to broker an immediate and lasting ceasefire deal, but it also says Biden's and Harris's commitment to Israel's security its qualitative military edge. The same, nothing has changed since the last convention. It's the same language. It's like copy and paste, commitment to Israel's security, its qualitative military edge, and its right to defend itself is ironclad. Those are the exact words. I advise everybody to look at the same wording that happened during the last convention. It's just basically copy and paste without mentioning anything, by the way, about the suffering of Palestinians, the death and the destruction. Over 40,000 people have been killed, 20,000 children have been murdered. None of that comes into a discussion. And as you've mentioned, meanwhile, now they bring their star, which, by the way, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she got more, louder applause at the center than Hillary Clinton, and then even Kamala Harris, which briefly appeared there. I mean, this is how popular now a year ago, she was on the fringes, and now she moved all the way to the mid-center, and she's speaking on behalf of Kamala Harris, and where she's saying that basically, and I'm quoting here, that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bring the hostages home. It's a charade, Jess.
But Jamal,
it's a parade and it's a charade.
Yeah, I think you're being too kind, to be honest. I think it's just rubbish. I just think it's the American version of Israeli Hasbara. It is just bizarre. And the fact that the Democratic Party actually believes that people who understand that genocide is occurring in Palestine and that the U.S. is not just enabling it, but actively engaged in murdering Palestinian civilians and children, those who understand that are not going to be fooled by this. This is why there are tens of thousands of protesters outside the United Center in Chicago who are protesting every single day. That's why the uncommitted sectors of the Democratic Party are continuing to voice their strong opposition to the DNC platform. Jamal, it is complete fabrication, a complete lie, a complete misrepresentation of the DNC platform for Kamala Harris, for Joe Biden, for Hillary Clinton, and for AOC to say that Kamala Harris has been working tirelessly to bring a ceasefire. It's rubbish. If you're working tirelessly to create a ceasefire, Jamal, I have a question for Kamala Harris. Then why are you sending $20 billion worth of aid just in the last week to a state that's committing genocide? So these are just words. The uncommitted bloc of the DNC, some of whom are, delegates, don't believe it. There are not just protests in the DNC, Jamal, but this weekend there was a large national protest of uncommitted voters, at multiple sites throughout the United States. And I'm going to throw something out there, Jamal, because there's a love fest right now with the mainstream media and Kamala Harris. She's not made any policy statements. She's like just, going out there and smiling and shaking hands with her vice presidential presumptive nominee, Tim Walz. But they haven't made any specific policy statements about the Middle East, about Palestine, about foreign policy. And I doubt that they will, Jamal. They're just going to say the same thing. So I'm going to say something kind of that's going to be shocking to some people, but it shouldn't be, especially those who've been listening to us for the last decade or more. I hear echoes of 2016 and Hillary Clinton. Remember when Hillary Clinton was up in the polls? Mm-hmm. Remember when the Democrats were having their love fest at their DNC convention and everybody was excited about Hillary and we're going to beat Donald Trump? It's what do we call it, Jamal? Old wine in new bottles. I fear and I predict, and I'm coming to the understanding that the Democrats are in the same delusional state now in 2024 that they were in 2016. No one should believe anything coming from the DNC about Palestine right now.
I agree with you 100%, and I'm going to add to this. Do you know that journalists' credentials have been denied? Because
yes, for Palestinians,
you've been talking about that Kamala Harris hasn't come up with a policy, or she hasn't sat down with a journalist for a long-term interview, someone who would press her and ask her those questions, which the big elephant in the room is what are you going to do about this genocide that you've been supporting basically with Biden for the past 10 months. And now what they're doing, they're playing this game. They're not allowing journalists because they don't want to face questions. They're allowing content creators. You know what, content creators? This is like TikTok kind of creators.
Yeah.
And remember,
Instagram.
Biden signed on in a bill to ban TikTok. But now Kamala Harris is using TikTok. You know, we have those kind of like groupies on TikTok, you know, drooling all over her and praising her and following her around and you know, she likes to cook in the kitchen, and this is her favorite meal, and she did this for the economy, she did that, and so forth. No questions. It's just like, you know, those short videos that they keep putting out there on TikTok and on Twitter and on Facebook without any serious journalists questioning her. And not only this, but also the media has been sheltering her and making excuses.
That's right.
This is the craziest thing about her. I mean, this is the presidential candidate. They're, you know, day in, day out, trashing Trump, right? Okay, for good or bad reasons, I don't know what. But at the same time, they're sheltering her. They're distancing her a little bit from Biden, even though the policies haven't changed. It's the same.
They're the
policies.
same.
As you said, they talk about peace and a ceasefire, and they send Israel $20 billion. They talk about ceasefire. They don't mention a genocide going on and the death of Palestinians. And they talk about freeing the hostages and the security of Israel, but not the security of Palestinians. They don't talk about anything when people bring up, you know, the embargo on Israel or the Leahy Act or law to prevent Israel from receiving weapons that it uses to murder civilians and children. None of that. She hasn't sat down. She hasn't been questioned. And they're creating, you're 100% right, they're creating this halo around her, that that's like the saint, the same halo that they created and with that confidence about Hillary Clinton, and
That's
then
right.
who ended up losing. And so now, back to the main question, and this is day 2 now, is she going to sit down
No.
with these uncommitted voters who some
No.
of them claim that they have something like 800,000 voters behind them?
No.
And
No,
so forth.
she won't.
And they represent key states like Michigan and Florida and others where she needs every single vote to win? Or is she going to ignore them and play the same game that Hillary Clinton played when she ignored the supporters of Bernie Sanders? And that's what she's doing. She's ignoring the progressive segment of the Democratic Party, which she claimed initially when she came that she rode that wave, that she was part of the progressive movement of the Democratic Party. And now they're ignoring these. And if they do, she's going to pay a heavy price.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right, Jamal. And I would say to Kamala Harris and the DNC, ignore uncommitted at your peril. Ignore the genocide in Gaza at your peril. You're going down the same yellow brick road of delusion that you did with Hillary Clinton in 2016. And you will pay the same price. I mean, that's my prediction as of today. And I'll tell you something about a couple of things you said, Jamal, which I think are really correct. They're shielding her. She's refusing to give any clear details about her opinions about what's happening in Palestine. The only thing that she's able to say is she's concerned about the suffering of Palestinians. That's her strongest statement about what's happening in Gaza, West Bank, and Jerusalem right now. That's not a policy statement, Jamal. That's just saying she wants to reduce the suffering. But has there been any increase in humanitarian or medical aid getting into Gaza? No, there's still 500,000 Palestinians facing imminent starvation. And now, Jamal, we have the first cases of polio in Gaza. I don't see Kamala Harris doing anything differently. And here's my prediction. She won't. She's not going to meet with the uncommitteds.
Well,
she is, listen, Jamal, Kamala Harris, and our listeners and viewers need to know this, is a deep supporter of the state of Israel. She is a deep supporter of U.S. foreign policy. There is no daylight between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Joe Biden says he's a proud Zionist. Kamala Harris uses different words, but as you and I know, we're judging policy, not words. And there's no light between the policy statements of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So buyer beware, which is another way of saying, Jamal, voter beware. You can be in this delusional state, man. You guys were in the same delusional state with Hillary Clinton. All I got to say is buyer beware.
Well, that's why they unleashed AOC, because they think that she can sway those uncommitted voters by saying a couple of things. Oh, she's so committed to the ceasefire. I also heard, I mean, that's my concern about the uncommitted, especially in the Arab Americans in the state of in Michigan, because I heard some of them arguing, well, give her a chance. You know, there's some of that. I see they've recruited few people to say,
a few
give her
people.
a chance. Well, I mean, what's the chance? My question is, how much of a chance to give someone after they sat down watching 40,000 people getting slaughtered? I mean, do we wait until 50,000 Palestinians get slaughtered? Do we wait until the number of children, which we'll talk about it later on, rises to about 25,000 kids? Is that the satisfactory number to say, give Kamala Harris a chance to do something about it, or give the Biden administration?
People are delusional, Jamal. I mean, let's be clear. We judge Biden, Harris, and any politician on their actions, not their rhetoric. It's the same rhetoric that Hillary Clinton tried to, the same narrative that Hillary Clinton tried in 2016. It failed. I want to just say something quick about the polls, because in terms of the media failing its responsibility, you hear this narrative, Kamala Harris is ahead in the polls. She's ahead in the polls. But what that polling is are national polls, Jamal, and they're not polls within the swing states, which is really the polling that matters. And breaking news for the media and for voters who kind of are lulled into this delusional state. If you look at swing states, Donald Trump is still ahead. Despite all of the hype that you're getting from the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of these places saying that she's ahead in the polls, that's the general. That's the same thing they were saying about Hillary Clinton. But in the specific 7 or 8 swing states, Jamal, Donald Trump is still winning, despite his abysmal kind of press conferences and his horrible campaigning and his horrible VP candidate. He's still ahead. And, after the Democratic convention, part of the honeymoon, or halo as you called it, is going to wear off. And the reality of shielding Kamala Harris from reality is going to sink in. And, we'll see if the mainstream media is able to press her. But I have a prediction. I mean, she's not going to sit down and have an interview about Gaza or about Palestine. She's just not. She's going to kind of deflect. She's going to say, oh, we don't want Palestinians to suffer, but we're going to send $20 billion to the Israelis so that they can, continue to slaughter Palestinian children. So I really think that, what is that saying, Jamal? If you don't understand history, you're destined to repeat it. I am so surprised by the Democrats' delusion and their failure to remember what happened in 2016. It's really bizarre to me that everybody is kind of in this la-la land about what's going on right now.
Moving on just to the ceasefire. That's
What is it, Jamal? Did you say ceasefire? What
the
ceasefire?
ceasefire deal. Well, I call it
Right.
the U.S. and you called it the U.S.-Israeli ceasefire deal, but it is a ceasefire deal sponsored by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar initially. And so there was a deal basically, and all of a sudden this deal has changed because the deal called for a permanent end to Israel's war on Gaza. This is, this is not something that we're making it up. This is something that what the United States started with. And now, all of a sudden, Anthony Blinken, he goes, and now he's actually there. He's met with Netanyahu and he's going to go to Egypt and go to Qatar. And after speaking with Netanyahu, the Israelis retreated from the main issues that the Biden administration, the Biden's proposal, I should say, maybe it's a better name for it. And they said, we want to update this agreement. And so they updated this agreement, and we'll talk about some of the updates, which basically maintaining military presence in Gaza, which really, this is the sticking point that Hamas does not want to have an occupation. That's the whole thing.
Full stop.
So they want to maintain a military presence in Gaza. They want to control the Philadelphia corridor. They want to control the Rafah border, and so forth. This is just like we're going back to square one. But the crazy thing about it now, Biden goes on Tuesday and he says, when he's asked about the proposal, I mean, really, it's like bewildering. I mean, just like, I would say, blatant lies. And he says Hamas was backing away from the deal agreed to by Israel. So now they reverse the thing. Israel amends the deal and puts all these conditions that weren't there. And Hamas says, hey, wait a minute, because this is not what you told us about, that basically you've changed it. This is, and actually the Hamas spokesman said that he accused the United States of merely buying time for Israel to continue genocide. Remember, last week Biden was saying in few days we're going to have a deal. Wait, 2-3 days, we bridged the gap and we reached an agreement. And then Netanyahu goes and says, no, I want to change this line and that line and that line. And then basically now the United States is saying that is Hamas's point. And I mean, Hamas have been saying that this is misleading because they said they were stressing that they were eager to reach a deal. But now the new provisions contradict
but it's not
the earlier framework.
Right. It's not misleading. It's lies. I mean, what they want to propose, Jamal, is so radically different than the proposal that was being negotiated on. Because just to remind our listeners and viewers, the deal that was being negotiated was very, very clear. Complete permanent cessation of military operations in Gaza, full stop. Removal of the occupation in Gaza, full stop. Release of all civilian hostages and resumption of humanitarian and medical aid. It was a very clear, unambiguous proposal, basically stopping the genocide, the military assault on civilians in Gaza. That's what was being negotiated. That's what was being discussed in Doha. That's what Hamas was in the process of agreeing to. That all got changed. And it got changed, Jamal, because of the DNC, Kamala Harris, Benjamin Netanyahu. They changed the terms, and guess what the new narrative is? Oh, Benjamin Netanyahu is agreeing to the peace deal, and bad Hamas is the only impediment. That's been their standard kind of narrative, Jamal, for the last going on 11 months. It's the typical, bait, we call it, Jamal, bait and switch. But I think people are kind of understand that this is BS and that this is the same old messaging that's been going on for months, right?
I hope so. I hope so because it's very clear. All that you have to do is put the initial proposal and look at it. Which, by the way, now Anthony Blinken has changed the name of this proposal when after
Right.
meeting with
Right.
in Tel Aviv with Benjamin
Netanyahu.
Netanyahu, which he says he
Right.
had a very constructive meeting with Netanyahu, who confirmed, and I'm quoting, who confirmed to me that Israel accepts. This is the key word, the bridging proposal. So now this is called the bridging proposal.
Right.
It's not the initial
right.
proposal. The bridger proposal and the bridging proposal, which Hamas refuses to accept, basically says that, and this is what Netanyahu insists on, keeping control of the Netzarim corridor, which separates the north and the south of Gaza. In other words, Israel will have military presence to separate the north and the south from Gaza. Anytime you want to cross from the north, and we're talking about a small territory, you have to go through Israeli checkpoint. They insist on controlling the Rafah border crossing, and they insist on controlling the Philadelphia corridor that borders Egypt. We're back to square one. They insist on basically control. Actually, it's worse than before because Gaza
worse.
before was, people used to refer to it as the largest open air prison because Israel controlled all its borders from air, from land and sea. But now they are also controlling it from within, Jess. With this deal,
Exactly.
they'll keep everything, but then they'll divide it into two sectors, north and south, and they control it from the middle, from within. And so why would Hamas accept that?
But Jamal, Hamas has been saying for weeks they will not accept this. Absolutely. In fact, if you listen carefully, and I did this, I listened to the Hamas spokesman, and he said something really important, and you put your finger on it. He said, we accept the original proposal. That's what they said. We accept the original proposal. And what Blinken and Netanyahu are doing are saying, we accept the new proposal, which is everything you just said. And
Which
by
is
the way,
written
there's
by
another.
Netanyahu.
It is. But here's the other thing you forgot to mention about the bridging proposal. In that proposal is a denial of access of Palestinians in Gaza who have been displaced the freedom to return to their homes. They are not guaranteed the freedom as IDP, as internally displaced peoples. They are not guaranteed the ability to return to their homes. So it's even more draconian. It's even more illegal under international law. And it's even more harsh. Why, as you said, and I agree completely, why would any reasonable person, why would Hamas, why would anybody agree to a proposal that is more draconian and more oppressive than what was happening before? Of course it's going to be rejected. But this is all posturing. It's for Kamala Harris and Benjamin Netanyahu, to be able to say, hey, we're working on it. Hamas is the bad guy. Isn't it bizarre, Jamal? Israel's committing genocide and starving children to death, and Hamas is the bad guy. It's bizarre, but this is the narrative that they're putting forth. Do you notice that Blinken is not talking about the 500,000 Palestinians who are starving to death, that he's not talking about the denial of medical aid coming in or the denial of food, water coming into Gaza right now? He's not talking about that the situation remains grave. He's not talking about polio being found in Gaza among Palestinian children, which is a grave public health disaster just waiting to explode. He's applauding this war criminal, basically, Benjamin Netanyahu, for agreeing to the policy. And there's another report, by the way, that came out in Haaretz, I'm sure you read it, where Netanyahu is saying to Blinken, yes, we agree, but then he's saying to his negotiators, no way. So he's not even agreeing to the bridging proposal in terms of what he's saying to his negotiators in Doha. So, not a surprise to you and me, but we want our viewers and listeners to really understand the reality of what's happening right now politically, because it's a very, very grim situation. There is no ceasefire. There will not be a ceasefire. The genocide is continuing, Jamal, and we can expect, I think, the genocide to continue into the 1-year mark and up to the November 4th election.
Not to mention that Benjamin Netanyahu killed the main negotiator for Hamas. Nobody talks about
Right.
that.
He assassinated him, yeah.
He assassinated Ismaili Haniyeh. Anyway, we can talk forever about actually all the atrocities and the war crimes that Israel has been committing in Gaza. But there is a missing story, just because we also talk about the children, which is the numbers 20 to 21,000 Palestinian children. Children are defined as an age group under the age of 18. But the bloodiest phase of the genocide is Israel has killed so far, these are confirmed, 2,100 Palestinian infants and toddlers in Gaza, which is this is an unprecedented, at this rate, by the way, an unprecedented number in the history of modern wars, that this many toddlers, I'm talking babies, a month, 2 months years old, 1 year, 2 years old, due to its bombing. And actually many of the numbers are low because many of them are still missing. I mean,
under the rubble.
Of course, we don't have to talk about that this is a flagrant violation of the rules of law, of war, and proportionality, military necessity, etc., and the legal and the moral obligation to take all necessary precautions to minimize the death of civilians and children. So the Euro Med Monitor, which you are familiar with, field team documented, these killings. They've been going to see, I don't know what qualifies babies. Is it under the age of 2? I assume it is. And that's the number. That's the recent number that they came up with. And of course, sadly, couple of weeks ago, August 13th, on Tuesday, that they documented the killing of 4-day-old twins, Asr and Aysal Muhammad. I don't know if you know about their story, Al-Qumsan.
Yeah.
The twins were killed along with their mother and their grandmother in an Israeli bombing that targeted a residential flat in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. And it's hard to even talk about. The father, after leaving the apartment, he went to obtain a birth certificate for his 2 newborn children. The father of the infants returned to discover that all of his family members, including the twins' grandmother, had been killed in an Israeli attack on the building. And then yet the United States talks about giving Israel a military edge. They talk about Israel's advanced technological capabilities, and Israel continues to target houses and shelter centers, knowing full well that they're full of civilians, including women and children. So this number of babies is an unprecedented number in modern warfare. It hasn't been documented anywhere in such a short period of time that they've been killing all these babies, not to mention the systematic killing of civilians, which, by the way, don't listen to Israel's reports and Hezbollah. Now it's been confirmed that 92% at least of the total number of deaths due to this genocide are civilians, basically. This is who they've been targeting.
But at a minimum, Jamal, because remember, according to the Lancet report that came out about a month ago, people who have expertise in looking at casualties of war, based on their research, have shown that reported deaths tend to underestimate the number of deaths 3 to 4 times. They have estimated that probably closer to 186,000 Palestinians have died. And at least, 40% are women and children of that. So with that number, including the 20,000 Palestinian children that remain missing, puts the number of dead civilians and Palestinian women and children who've been murdered by the Israeli military with American-made weapons, proportionally per population, the most the highest percentage of civilian deaths in modern warfare of a total population, by far, Jamal. It's not even close. And you want to hear the bizarreness of this? The Hezbollistas, the Israeli kind of performative experts, are really debating, is this or is this not a genocide? We're not sure. We're scratching our heads. We don't think the ICJ is, doing the kind of Hezbollah and the kind of disinformation and the kinds of spinning that the Israeli American media are doing around this is really criminal. It really is, because the reality on the ground is that a genocide is occurring. They're being targeted. Women and children are being singled out for this, Jamal. I mean, we hear every single day of a missile going into a tent because the buildings don't exist anymore. People are living in tents inside of a school courtyard run by the UN and are being targeted. And so this mass killing of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, it's tragic to see how the mainstream media, or just most of the media for that matter, it's not even on page 1 anymore. It's not even on page 2 anymore. It's not even on page 3. You have to dig down, Jamal, in the Times or the Post to maybe the 4th or 5th page, either on the online or paper print section of it, to find any mention of Gaza anymore. It's fallen from the wayside because they want to celebrate the Democratic Party's kind of festival of love. We're going to beat Donald Trump this time. I mean, it's truly remarkable how the world leaders are turning a blind eye against the massacre of Palestinian civilians, these women and children who are dying every day at the hands of these American-made weapons. And I just wonder, Jamal, what's $20 billion more weapons going to do? What's left to destroy in Gaza? I guess they're going to use those weapons as they have been, and this maybe is a segue to our next segment. I mean, the West Bank and Jerusalem is under attack right now too. Settlers are running wild on the Haram Sharif. They're running wild, not just in Jerusalem, but throughout the West Bank. Palestinians cannot move freely within the West Bank. They're being killed. Homes are being torched. Farmland and olive trees are being uprooted. We are not hearing anything about the vicious attacks by the illegal colonial settlers in the West Bank, Jamal, who are terrorizing Palestinians in the West Bank. That activity has gone up dramatically at this time.
Yeah, I want to talk about this, Jess, and specifically I want to talk about the latest horrific massacre that happened in the Palestinian town of Jet by these settlers. This is the latest. As you know, since October 7th and onward, every single day, the colonial settlers attack Palestinians, and they torch their homes and their cars and kill them and beat up their children and so forth. But recently there was this massacre, and this is the one, actually the only one that I've heard serious condemnation by the United States, France, the UK, the EU, because it was like so horrendous and so obvious. But before I get there, I want to answer your question about the $20 billion. The $20 billion, and this is the thing, the $20 billion were instigated because now the worry about Iran is going to retaliate and Hezbollah after the assassination in Tehran and after also the other assassination in Beirut. So there is this major rush, Israel goes and pokes the bear and then expect retaliation, and then the American taxpayer pays for it because they go and commit this murder. And I tell you one thing, the United States is not worried the way I look at it, they are not worried about what's happening in Gaza. They're not worried about what's happening to the Palestinians.
They don't care.
All that money is rushing with. They keep talking about the security of Israel. They are, for the very first time, seriously worried about Israel, because everything that's been happening, this new proposal, is to delay the retaliation by Iran, because Iran made it clear, and Hezbollah made it clear, this is not going to go unpunished. And if you look at what's happening in Israel, Israel is on the verge of collapse, economical collapse. Every single indicator that you see, read the Wall Street Journal, read Barron, read the high unemployment, read about the number of Israelis who left the north of Israel and they're out of work, and all the reserves that they've been calling on, so they cannot work. The airport is paralyzed. The Ben Gurion airport is paralyzed. People are leaving the country. They're not coming. American Airlines just canceled flights to Ben Gurion airport until April. United Airlines had already canceled flights to Ben Gurion airport, and many European carriers have stopped going. The port of Eilat is practically empty. Israel is paralyzed. This money is really a shakedown from the U.S. taxpayer because of its attacks on Iran and on Hezbollah. So this whole concern really to freeze, to kind of buy time. This is what Hamas buy time while they're slaughtering, Gaza to bring Hamas to its knees, versus also calming down the Iranians and saying, okay, we're going to have a ceasefire, because the United States at this point is not ready to defend Israel should an attack by Iran happens. And Hezbollah has been testing the Iron Dome every single day and finding cracks into it, and they know what is exactly the percentage of success that the Iron Dome can provide. And so if Iran seriously attacks Israel and targets Tel Aviv, the country is going to collapse. So it's all about that. Trust me, this $20 billion is just to keep Israel on its feet until they find a solution. But anyway,
can I just say, really quick, because I think your analysis is really important, Jamal. And I think Iran and Hezbollah, as well as the Houthis, are playing this in such a smart way. I mean, you're hearing all this political chatter. Oh, Iran is not that strong. They're afraid to attack. That's BS. They're being very strategic. They're making the Israeli military and political elite sweat because, as you said, because of the fear of retaliation, and it is coming, but because they don't know when, and it hasn't happened right away, it is paralyzing not just the economy, but it's paralyzing everything within the apartheid state right now. So I think Hezbollah and Iran are, and the Houthis, by the way, and what's happening in Yemen are being very strategic right now, because the Israelis know, Jamal, as you said, something's coming. But the fact that they don't know when is actually a very strategic way to kind of engage with them right now.
You're right. So moving on to the latest pogrom, this is targeting the Palestinian town of Jess. And this is on August 15th.
Yeah.
Israeli settlers marched into the town while people were asleep, started setting cars on fire, set 4 homes on fire, started shooting left and right. People who tried to defend their property got shot. They killed a young Palestinian IT technician, 23-year-old, Rashid Sida. They killed him. He just stuck his head out of the window, shot him. They wounded 5 others. And this went on for hours. Took about 2 hours before the Israeli army showed up, even though they were sitting watching it from the hilltop about a mile down the road, and saw what was going on. And so this is the latest, and there are several of those, but I want to talk about this because this was the latest one. people were streaming what was going on. Palestinians on their phones, they were streaming this. That actually what drove for the very first time, the U.S. ambassador in Tel Aviv to condemn the settler violence. And for the very first time, several European countries, including the EU, to say something about it and calling it a pogrom, a settlers pogrom, which is basically has been going on for years, as we know. I mean, this is not the first time, but this is the latest of which we know so far, at least now, 18 communities in the West Bank, small villages and communities, have been forcefully displaced since the war began, and no one is covering this. And I don't know if we have the time to get into, but the other observers, one side of the hill, the Israeli military watching these settlers wreaking havoc. The other side of the hill is the PA, the Palestinian Authority policemen who were trained by the Canadians and by the Americans to protect Abbas and the compound. At the same time, they're sitting there watching what's going on to these villagers. So what we're talking about now, you have all these villages in the West Bank outside Ramallah. Even that doesn't stop them, because just yesterday, Israel went through Ramallah and arrested people, and they go to Jenin, which is supposedly under the control of the PA, and they kill people. But when I'm talking about this Area C, where the settlers have been basically stealing the land day in, day out, it's in no man's land. It's just like settlers are armed to the teeth. You got villagers who live off the land, Palestinian villagers, and no one is coming to help them. Not the Israeli military and not the Palestinian Authority. And I don't know how far is this going to continue before they start bearing arms and starting to resist, because if they don't, and they have every right to do so, to protect their homestead, we're waiting for a major massacre, not like a small pogrom here and there, but we're waiting for a major massacre that's going to happen.
I think that's exactly right, Jamal, because people are not paying attention to the West Bank. And this was also, I thought you were going to mention this, but this was also buried under the news. But the United States decided not to condemn or hold accountable that right-wing militia Israeli military unit that committed those atrocities. You know, they did an investigation. They were going to hold them accountable because of the atrocities they committed in the West Bank. They completed their evaluation, and they decided, despite the fact that they committed multiple murders of Palestinian civilians, and burned homes and stole land and all of that, they decided to let them off scot-free. So I have another prediction before we stop today. You know, every 4 years, you know, when there's a big presidential election, there's something called the October surprise, right? Something that really sways the election. I think we're headed for an October surprise, Jamal, on the 1-year anniversary of the genocide in Gaza. And I think there's going to be something big happening. And because it's going to fall on the lap of Kamala Harris to not say anything and to let this genocide occur, it could sway the election even more. That's my prediction. I'm not going to say what I think it is yet, but I think we're headed for something big in October.
You might be right, Jess. I mean, I think every day now is an October surprise. Every day that's happening, and every day the massacre continues, the genocide continues on Palestinians. Listen, I don't see any reports. Every single day, if you tune in to, for example, Al Jazeera or any of the news outlets, and by the way, I should remind our listeners, today, Israel has killed the 170th journalist in Gaza. Just 2 days ago, the number stood at 169. They killed another journalist, and now we're up to 170 Palestinian journalists. Do you hear an outcry from Western journalists about this? Nothing.
Nothing.
So 170, and so if we're talking about the news, number one, Western journalists, Israel prevents Western media from entering and seeing what's going on. They just have to get their feed from Al Jazeera. And Israel is not kidding. They are hunting down journalists. Literally. They are hunting down journalists in Gaza. They want to make sure that no one sees these horrific images of Palestinian children being pulled from beneath the rubble, and you know, the images you see of limbs gathered and body parts and so forth in Rafah and elsewhere. That in order for them to prevent these images, and they've been failing at it, except Western media has been cowardly, you know, basically in the way their coverage. Every single day. A few days ago, they killed 40 people in one day. In one day, they killed 40 people.
And you know what was the headline, Jamal? After
Nothing.
they murdered 40? No, the headline, Jamal, was Kamala Harris with a big smile on her face, waving to the crowd. That's what we just articulated, 40 Palestinians murdered by American-made weapons by the Israeli military, and Kamala Harris smiling, you know, with a halo around her head. That basically encapsulates the media coverage of where we're at right now and where we're headed. And Arab Talk, you and I and our show are going to really confront that kind of hasbara, that kind of American-Israeli depiction of what's happening in Palestine right now, because what you see is not reality. And unfortunately, and I'm just saying this to all the Democrats out there, you better wake up. This is 2016 redo all over again.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.